Ethan had been stationed on the far side of the galaxy for 6 months. Far away from Earth, the planet Tal Morris was a quiet one. Not many missions took place here, and the locals had little to offer. It was a perfect spot for a human soldier to take a break from the chaos of the war, or so he thought. On the morning of his usual patrol, Ethan received a strange transmission. The signal was weak, but the message was clear. Help. Please. Came from a remote region on the planet, where no one dared to go. Most of the area was marked off limits. Due to the dangerous terrain and ancient ruins that were scattered throughout the region, yet Ethan's curiosity was stronger than his hesitation. He contacted his commander, but his request for permission to investigate was denied. "Stay within your designated area, soldier," came the response. But Ethan wasn't the kind of person who followed orders blindly. He had been raised with the belief that sometimes you had to do what was right, even if it meant breaking the rules, without wasting another moment. He took his equipment and set off toward the signal's origin. As he ventured deeper into the wilderness, the air grew thicker, and the ruins became more numerous. Strange alien structures loomed in the distance, their jagged shapes casting long shadows over the cracked ground. When Ethan reached the location, he was surprised to find no signs of life, just an eerie silence. But as he stepped closer to the ruins, he heard it again, a faint voice calling for help. It was a soft, desperate sound, coming from somewhere beneath the earth. He followed the noise until he reached a large stone archway that led into the ground. The air smelled musty, like ancient dust and forgotten memories. Ethan hesitated, but only for a moment. He took a deep breath and descended into the darkness. The passage was narrow and winding. Ethan's boots echoed against the stone walls as he moved cautiously, his flashlight casting brief glimmers of light. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Then, just as he thought he had reached a dead end, he heard something, a faint gasp. Ethan quickly turned his flashlight toward the sound and found a figure huddled in the corner. Lying motionless on the cold stone floor, she was a woman, an alien woman, with blue skin that shimmered softly in the dim light. Her features were delicate, almost otherworldly, and her long, flowing hair glowed faintly. She appeared injured, her body bruised and bloodied, but she was still breathing. His heart raced. Ethan knew immediately that she was important. She had to be. Without thinking, he rushed forward and knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. She opened her eyes slowly, and they locked onto his. Her gaze was intense, as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The look in her eyes was filled with a mix of fear and relief. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice weak. Ethan's hand hovered over her, unsure of how to help. His training didn't cover situations like this. Saving alien royalty wasn't something they'd prepared him for. But the urgency in her voice pushed him forward. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "My name's Zoria," she replied. "I am a queen." Ethan's mind raced. A queen? He had heard of royalty from various alien species, but he never imagined he would meet one. And on a mission like this? "Zoria, what happened to you? Who did this?" he asked as he carefully helped her sit up. She grimaced in pain, but her expression remained calm. "I was betrayed," she said softly. "My people turned against me. I am the last of my kind." Ethan's heart sank. The last of her kind? That meant her people were going to wiped out. He had to help her. He was just a soldier, alone on an alien planet. Before he could speak, she grabbed his hand with surprising strength, her blue eyes locking onto his. "You have to protect me," she pleaded. "They will come for me. They will never stop until I am dead." Ethan's mind raced, didn't know what to say. What could he do? Wasn't a diplomat or a leader. But something inside him stirred. He couldn't just leave her here to die. He made a promise to himself he would protect her. "Whatever it took, I'll help you," Ethan said, his voice filled with resolve. "But we need to get out of here fast." Zoria nodded, still clutching his hand tightly. With his help, she stood shakily, leaning on him for support. They made their way back through the winding tunnels, but as they neared the exit, Ethan heard something. The soft sound of footsteps. He turned to Zoria, his expression serious. "Stay behind me. You have any weapons?" She nodded, her face grim. "I have some, but I won't be able to fight in this state." Ethan grabbed his blaster, holding it at the ready. He wasn't sure who or what was coming, but he had a feeling it wasn't going to be friendly. The footsteps grew louder. Zoria pulled Ethan closer, her voice shaking. "Please, don't leave me. I can't face them alone." Ethan turned to her, his heart aching at the fear in her voice. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I won't leave you, I promise." The footsteps reached a crescendo, and Ethan took a deep breath, preparing for what was to come. He knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. The atmosphere was tense as Ethan and Zoria moved quickly through the ruins. Their footsteps echoed off the stone walls, their breaths sharp and quick in the cold air. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden danger. Every crack in the stone could be hiding their enemies. Ethan kept his blaster at the ready, his eyes scanning every corner of the passage as they made their way back to the surface. Zoria, though injured, was moving with surprising grace. Her blue skin shimmered in the faint light, her long glowing hair trailing behind her like a river of starlight. She was beautiful, but there was a sadness in her eyes, a deep weariness that seemed to weigh her down. Ethan couldn't help but notice the way she winced with each step, the way her hand clutched his for support. "I'm sorry," she whispered as they walked. "I didn't mean to drag you into this." "You didn't drag me into anything. I'm here to help." But even as he said the words, he wasn't sure what he could do. He was just one soldier, and Zoria was no ordinary woman. She was a queen, a ruler of a people he knew little about. The weight of her title wasn't something he could understand, but he could see the pain in her eyes. Whatever had happened to her people, it had broken something inside of her as they reached the surface. The sun had already begun to set, casting long shadows across the ruins. Ethan squinted against the fading light, trying to get his bearings. He had to get Zoria to safety, but where? There was no backup, no support. It was just the two of them now. Zoria seemed to sense his hesitation. "There's a place," she said quietly. "A place where they won't find us, at least not for a while." Ethan turned to her, his brow furrowed. "Where?" Eyes shifted to the horizon, her gaze distant. "A hidden city. My people built it before the war. It's far from here, deep in the forest. It's a place for those who needed refuge. It was meant to be a sanctuary, but now—" She paused, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Now, it's the only place I have left." Ethan's heart tightened. He didn't know what it meant to lose everything, but he could see the depth of Zoria's grief. He nodded, determined to get her there. "We'll go there. We'll be safe." Together they started their journey toward the forest. As they walked, Zoria explained more about her people, the Zorathians. She spoke of a once glorious empire that stretched across the stars, a civilization rich in knowledge, art, and culture. But all of that had crumbled when her closest advisors betrayed her. "They were jealous," she said softly. "They didn't want me to rule. They wanted power for themselves. They thought they could control the empire through fear, through lies, and they nearly succeeded." She took a deep breath. "I've lost everything, Ethan. My family, my throne, my people." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "I can't imagine what you're going through." Zoria gave a bitter laugh. "No, you can't, but I appreciate your kindness." Forest loomed ahead, dark and thick with the shadows of ancient trees. The air grew cooler as they entered the woods, the ground soft beneath their feet. The path was winding and narrow, but Zoria seemed to know exactly where she was going. Her steps became steadier, her posture more determined. Ethan followed closely behind, keeping an eye out for any signs of danger. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound being the rustling of the leaves underfoot. Zoria seemed lost in thought, her mind heavy with memories of a time long gone. Ethan wanted to ask her more about the war, about what had happened to her people. But he could sense that she wasn't ready to talk about it yet. After a long while, they came to a clearing, and in the center of it stood a small, hidden village. The buildings were ancient, made of stone and wood, their designs intricate and beautiful. It looked like something out of a dream, a place untouched by time. The beauty of the village was overshadowed by the sadness in Zoria's eyes. This was her last hope, the last place where she could feel some connection to her past. She stopped at the entrance, her hand resting on the doorframe. "This is it," she said quietly. "This is where it all began." Ethan didn't speak. At first, he could see the pain in her expression, the weight of her lost kingdom pressing down on her. But he also saw something else: strength. She had survived the fall of her empire, the betrayal of her people, and the loneliness that came with being a queen without a throne. There was no giving up in Zoria. No matter how much she had lost, she kept moving forward. They entered the village, and Zoria led him to a small room in one of the buildings. It was simple but comforting, with soft cushions and warm lighting. She collapsed onto a chair, her body exhausted from the journey. Ethan stood by the door, unsure of what to do next. Zoria looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "You don't have to thank me. I'm here because I want to help." Zoria smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "You're the first person who has ever said that to me. Is everyone else? They only wanted something from me." Ethan's heart ached for her. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going anywhere. No matter what, he would protect her. She had lost everything, but as long as he was there, she wouldn't have to face the darkness alone. He took a step toward her, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're not alone anymore." Zoria looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. She found none. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't leave me." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He knelt in front of her, taking her hand in his. "I won't leave you. I promise." And in that moment, Zoria finally allowed herself to believe in something again: hope. The village was quiet, peaceful in a way that seemed almost too good to be true. Zoria had led Ethan to the heart of the hidden sanctuary, and though the place had once been full of life, now it stood as a reminder of everything she had lost. The faint whispers of the past lingered in the air. Ethan couldn't help but wonder how long this village had stood untouched by time. The buildings, made of stone and wood, had stood the test of time. But Zoria, the last of her people, had seen everything crumble. Zoria spent the next few days resting, her body still weak from the injuries she had sustained. Ethan stayed close, watching over her as she recovered. They spent their time quietly, Zoria teaching him more about her people, the Zorathians, and Ethan helping her with whatever tasks she could manage. It was a delicate balance. Zoria's strength was returning, but it was clear she carried the weight of the past with her. Ethan, for his part, had grown attached to the alien queen. There was something about her calm demeanor, her quiet strength, that drew him in. Had never met anyone like her, someone who had lost everything yet still fought for survival. She was more than just royalty to him. She was a survivor, and in that survival, he saw something he wanted to protect. One evening, as they sat by a fire, Zoria spoke of her past, of the empire she once ruled, the people she had loved, and the war that had torn it all apart. "We were a proud people," she said, her voice soft, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "The Zorothians were known across the galaxy for our wisdom, our art, our strength, but greed and jealousy. They destroyed everything. The very people I trusted turned on me, and in the end, it wasn't just my throne I lost. It was my family. My friends, my people." Ethan listened quietly, not sure how to respond. What could he say? He couldn't change the past, but he could help her move forward. "They betrayed you," he said simply, his eyes meeting hers. Zoria nodded, her gaze far away. "Yes, but betrayal isn't the worst part. The worst part is knowing that I failed. I failed to protect my people, and because of that, they're gone." Ethan reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't fail anyone. You did the best you could." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a sadness he could feel deep in his chest. "Did I? Was it enough? They're all dead, Ethan. My people, my family. And now I'm the last one left. I should have been stronger, smarter. I should have seen the betrayal coming." Ethan could feel the weight of her words, the crushing guilt that clung to her. But he couldn't let her believe she had failed. He shook his head firmly. You didn't fail. No one could have seen that coming. You were betrayed, and there's nothing you could have done. Zoria didn't respond right away. Instead, she stood up and walked to the edge of the firelight, staring out into the darkened woods. Ethan followed her, standing a few paces behind. He didn't want to push her, but he couldn't stand seeing her like this, lost, broken. You don't have to carry this alone, Zoria, he said quietly. I'm here. I won't leave you. Zoria turned to face him, her eyes filled with emotion. And what about when the enemy comes for me again? What will you do then, Ethan? I can't protect you. Can't even protect myself. Ethan stepped forward, his expression resolute. I'll protect you. I don't care what happens. I'm not leaving you. Not now, not ever. For a moment, Zoria just stared at him as if searching for something in his eyes. Then slowly she nodded. I don't know what I'd do without you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Ethan could respond, a noise interrupted the moment, a rustling from the trees beyond the village. Zoria's head snapped up, her expression shifting, from sadness to alertness in an instant. Ethan's hand went to his blaster, his heart pounding in his chest. Zoria motioned for him to stay quiet, her eyes narrowing as she listened intently. We're not alone, she whispered. Ethan crouched down beside her, keeping his voice low. What is it? Who's out there? Zoria's gaze was fixed on the darkness, her senses sharp despite her injuries. It's them, she said, her voice steady but filled with dread. They found us. Before Ethan could ask any more questions, a figure stepped out of the shadow stall, dark and unmistakably hostile. It was one of the mercenaries who had been hunting Zoria. Ethan could tell by the cold, calculating look in the man's eyes. This wasn't just an ordinary bounty hunter. This was someone with a mission. The man smirked as he saw them, his hand resting casually on the weapon strapped to his side. Well, the little queen is still alive. How fortunate for me. Ethan stood, his blaster aimed at the man. I don't think you're welcome here. The mercenary's smile widened. I wasn't asking for permission. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Zoria. I've been sent to bring you back. Alive, if possible, but I wouldn't count on it. Zoria took a step back, her face hardening. You think you can take me? You think you can control me? The mercenary chuckled darkly. I don't have to control you, princess. I just have. To make sure you don't escape again? Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger of his blaster, but before he could fire, the mercenary was joined by two others, emerging from the shadows with weapons drawn. The odds were no longer in their favor. Zoria looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with fear. We need to run now. Ethan nodded, but he knew they wouldn't make it far. Not with so many of them. Fight. We can't let them take you. Eyes flashed with a mixture of fear and determination. Then let's fight. The air around them was heavy with tension as the mercenaries surrounded Ethan and Zoria. The night had grown colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly into the forest. Ethan's fingers tightened around the blaster, his heart racing. He had fought in battles before, but this was different. This wasn't a war where he could rely on a well-trained unit or reinforcements. It was just him and Zoria against the world. One of the mercenaries stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. You've nowhere to run, he said, his voice steady. This time we'll make sure you don't escape. The queen's little game is over. Zoria didn't flinch. She had been through this before, but Ethan could see the fear in her eyes, a fear that was quickly replaced by determination. She wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. We'll see about that, Zoria said, her voice low and steady. She raised her hand, a signal to Ethan that she had a plan. He nodded and stood his ground, watching the mercenaries carefully. Ethan had fought many battles, but facing down these mercenaries was different. They weren't just after Zoria, they were after her life. They wanted to erase her, to make sure her bloodline didn't rise again. Ethan knew they would do anything. To see her fall? Without warning, one of the mercenaries lunged at Zoria, but Ethan was quicker. He fired a single shot, sending the mercenary stumbling back, his body crumpling to the ground. The others paused, clearly shocked by Ethan's quick reaction. Zoria's eyes widened. Ethan, you stay close to me, Ethan interrupted, his voice firm. He didn't have time to explain. The remaining two mercenaries advanced cautiously, each of them drawing weapons from their sides. Ethan and Zoria had no choice now. They had to fight or die. The first mercenary raised his blaster, aiming at Ethan, but Zoria moved swiftly, stepping in front of Ethan, her own weapon raised. In a flash, she fired, the blast hitting the mercenary in the chest. He staggered back, a look of disbelief on his face, before collapsing to the ground. Ethan couldn't help but be impressed. Zoria had more skill than he'd expected. But he couldn't let his guard down. They weren't safe yet. The last mercenary, realizing he was outnumbered, turned to flee. But before he could take a single step, a sharp voice called from behind. "Him. Don't let him get away," Zoria shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised his blaster and fired, the shot hitting the mercenary in the leg, causing him to fall to the ground with a cry of pain. Zoria moved quickly, her hand extended to catch him before he could escape. He groaned, clutching his leg. "Ow! You won't get away with this," he hissed. "You can't hide forever, Zoria. Your enemies are everywhere. The galaxy is turning against you." Zoria stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with a quiet fury. "I don't care about the galaxy. I care about surviving, and I'm not running anymore." Ethan stepped beside her, his blaster still aimed at the mercenary. "You're?" "Right," he said. "We're not running. We're fighting." The mercenary let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can defeat an entire empire? You're nothing but a human soldier?" Ethan's grip tightened on his blaster. "You don't know anything about humanity. We don't give up, no matter the odds." The mercenary's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but before he could say another word, Zoria raised her hand. The sound of a sharp crack echoed through the night air. The mercenary collapsed, unconscious, and the two of them stood in silence. Catching their breath, Zoria glanced at Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved me," she said softly. Ethan gave her a half-smile. "I said I wouldn't leave you. We're in this together." The sounds of the forest seemed to return to normal as the adrenaline began to fade. But Ethan knew this fight wasn't over. They had won this battle, but there were still many more to come. The mercenaries weren't the only ones after Zoria. She had powerful enemies, okay? Enemies who would stop at nothing to take her down. Zoria turned away from the fallen mercenary, her expression hardening. "I should have known it wouldn't be this easy. The galaxy is full of betrayal." Ethan watched her closely, sensing that something deeper was at play. "What do you mean?" Zoria's gaze darkened, and for the first time she seemed truly vulnerable. "I trusted someone, an ally, someone who swore to protect me. But it turns out they were the ones who betrayed me first." Ethan frowned, his mind racing. "What are you saying?" Zoria looked at him, her eyes filled with regret. "The mercenaries? They weren't just hired by my enemies. They were working with someone close to Mizuman I trusted." She paused, her voice barely a whisper. Betrayal, it came from within. Ethan was stunned. He had always thought of betrayal as something distant, something that happened between enemies. But this was different. Someone who had been close to Zoria, someone she had trusted, had turned on her. That's why they're always... One step ahead, Zoria continued, her voice shaking slightly. "They've been feeding my enemies information, the attacks, the traps. It was all planned by someone who knows me better than I thought." Ethan's mind spun as he pieced it together. "Who did this? Who betrayed you?" Zoria shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but I will find out. And when I do, they will pay for what they've done." Ethan's resolve hardened. He couldn't let Zoria face this alone. Close to her had turned on her. It would only get worse from here. But they wouldn't back down. He had promised to protect her, and that's exactly what he would do. "We'll find them," Ethan said firmly. "We'll figure this out together." Zoria looked at him, her expression softening. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what I would do without you." Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. "You're not alone. I'm not going anywhere." And with that, the two of them stood in the quiet forest, ready for whatever came next. The galaxy had betrayed her, but Zoria wasn't about to give up. Neither was Ethan. The night was quiet once again, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Ethan and Zoria had retreated to a small hidden room within the village. Zoria sat on the bed, her thoughts distant, her mind heavy with the weight of the betrayal she had just revealed. Ethan stood near the window, keeping watch. His heart was still racing from the fight, but his mind kept returning to Zoria's words. Someone close to her had betrayed her. It wasn't just a matter of enemies hunting her down. It was someone she trusted, someone who had worked with her, someone who knew her every move. The very idea of it haunted him. He turned back to look at her. Zoria's face was a mixture of sadness and anger, her eyes staring out into the darkness as if searching for answers in the night. Ethan knew she was struggling, but she wasn't one to show weakness. He had seen her fight with fierce determination. He had seen the strength in her, but now he saw the cracks in that armor. Zoria looked up at him, catching his gaze. "I didn't want you to know about this. I didn't want to drag you further into my world." Ethan shook his head, stepping closer to her. "You didn't drag me into anything. I chose to stay, and I'm not leaving. You don't have to carry this alone." Zoria's eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed to relax. "I don't deserve you, Ethan," she whispered. "I've caused so many people pain, so much suffering, and now it feels like everything is falling apart." Ethan sat beside her, his gaze steady and comforting. "It's not falling apart. We're still standing, and we'll figure this out together." Zoria's lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but she hesitated. She sighed deeply. "I was always taught that the strength of a leader comes from their ability to make tough decisions, to sacrifice. But what if I was wrong? What if I was never meant to lead? What if I was never meant to save my people?" Ethan reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You did everything you could. No one could have stopped the betrayal, and you can't blame yourself for it." Zoria turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "You really believe that?" Ethan nodded. "I do. Because I know what it's like to feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. But sometimes, the hardest thing is to let go of that weight and trust that the people who care about you will help you carry it." Zoria was silent for a moment, her thoughts drifting away. Ethan could see the battle inside her between the need to fight and the desire to give up. He couldn't blame her. She had already lost so much, but she had also gained something. Someone who cared, someone who was willing to stand by her side, no matter what. Zoria finally spoke again, her voice quiet, but filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "I want to fight, Ethan. I want to reclaim what was taken from me. Not for power, not for glory, but for the people who once believed in me." Ethan smiled softly. "Then let's fight." The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. Zoria had led them to the heart of the Zorthian rebellion, a group of loyalists who had been working in the shadows to overthrow the forces that had betrayed her. It was a small group, but they were determined, and their cause was just. Leaders of the rebellion were cautious at first, unsure of whether Zoria's return was a blessing or a curse. But Ethan's presence seemed to settle their nerves. They'd fought alongside humans before, and they knew what Ethan represented: strength, loyalty, and an unyielding will to survive. Zoria stood at the head of the small council, her posture more upright, her voice more confident. She spoke with authority, her words clear and precise. "We need to take back what was stolen. Can't wait any longer. The traitors have already moved too far, and every moment we waste, they grow stronger." Ethan stood by her side, watching the rebellion leaders closely. He could see the determination in their eyes. They believed in Zoria, and that belief was growing, but there was still a long way to go. There would be no easy victory, and the price would be high. One of the leaders, a tall Zorathian male named Vorn, spoke up. "We've lost contact with several of our key allies. The traitors have been taking out our communications. We're isolated." Zoria's face hardened. "Then we go in. We find our allies. We take back the communications, and we strike." Ethan could see that she wasn't just talking about the mission. She was talking about herself. She wasn't just reclaiming her throne. She was reclaiming her place in the world, her purpose. And he would help her do that, no matter the cost. "We move at dawn," Zoria said, her voice filled with fire. Strike quickly, we strike hard." The room was silent for a moment. Then one by one, the rebellion leaders nodded, their faces filled with resolve. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. That night, as Ethan lay in the quiet darkness, his mind was filled with thoughts of the coming battle. Zoria had changed in front of him. She'd gone from a broken queen to a woman who was ready to fight for what she believed in. And he was with her every step of the way. The next morning, he set out before the sun had fully risen, their journey taking them through dense forests and across barren wastelands. It was a long and grueling trek, but Zoria's determination never wavered. She had a new fire inside her, fire that burned brighter with each passing moment. As they reached the rebel base, they found it in disarray. The traitors had attacked earlier, but the rebels had managed to hold their ground. Zoria and Ethan led the charge, their forces coming together in a powerful display of unity. They fought side by side, Ethan covering Zoria's back as she led. The charge into enemy territory. They encountered fierce resistance, but with every step they took, the momentum shifted. Zoria's leadership inspired those around her, and Ethan's bravery pushed them to fight harder. The traitors, who had once been so confident in their victory, were now retreating. When the battle finally ended, the rebellion had won. The traitors had been driven out, and the rebels had reclaimed their stronghold. Zoria stood in the middle of the battlefield, her eyes scanning the horizon, a look of determination in her gaze. She had won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. Ethan stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You did it." Zoria turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did it." And for the first time in a long while, Zoria allowed herself to believe in the future. The morning sun was still low in the sky when Zoria, Ethan, and the rest of the rebellion began their march toward the heart of the traitors' stronghold. The ground beneath them was still wet with the dew of the night, and the air was thick. With anticipation, every step forward felt heavier, every breath felt more strained, but Zoria's determination never wavered. This was it. The final battle. For weeks, the rebellion had been planning this moment. They had gathered their forces, prepared their weapons, and mapped out the best way to strike. They knew their enemies were strong, but Zoria had something they didn't: her people's loyalty, her people's spirit. And they weren't going to let her fall again. Zoria walked beside Ethan, her eyes focused on the path ahead, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. She was calm, but Ethan could sense the weight she carried. The responsibility of her people, of their survival, hung on her shoulders. The ghosts of the past whispered in her mind, but she was not going to let them control her anymore. Today, she would prove to herself and to everyone that she was not broken. Ethan's presence was a quiet comfort, a steady reminder that no matter what happened, she wasn't alone. He had promised to stay by her side, and he had kept that promise. His loyalty was unwavering, and that gave Zoria the strength she needed as they approached the traitor stronghold. The forest around them began to thin. The trees gave way to open ground, and in the distance, the silhouette of the enemy fortress loomed on the horizon. It was a massive structure built to intimidate, built to hold power. But it wasn't invincible, not anymore. "We're almost there," Zoria said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "This is where everything changes." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "We fight for your future, Zoria, for everything you've lost." Zoria gave him a small smile, but there was no time for words now. The time for talking was over. Time for action had come. The group paused at the edge of a large clearing where the enemy's outer defenses were set up. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. Zoria signaled for the group to stop and whispered a command to her second-in-command. A tall, stern woman named Jalen nodded and moved into the shadows with a few of the rebel soldiers. It was time to make their move. Zoria's heart beat faster as she felt the weight of what was to come. There was no turning back now. She couldn't afford to hesitate, couldn't afford to doubt herself. She had to lead her people to victory, no matter the cost. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "We're with you." Zoria turned to face him, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "Thank you," she said. Softly, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the distant wind. The rebels moved forward in silence, their movements swift and calculated. They approached the outer wall of the stronghold, where the guards were distracted by the commotion in the distance. It was the perfect moment. Without a word, Zoria led the charge, her blade raised high. The rebels followed her, charging into the enemy's defenses with a roar. The battle was fierce, chaos erupting all around them. Blaster fire crackled through the air, the sound of metal clashing against metal echoed in the distance. Zoria fought with everything she had. Each swing of her blade, each strike was a testament to her strength. She moved through the enemy with the precision of a trained warrior, her focus unbreakable. Ethan fought by her side, his blaster firing with deadly accuracy. He had seen war before, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a battle for the future of an entire people. Every shot he fired, every move he made was for Zoria, for the rebellion, for everything they had lost. They fought through the outer defenses, pushing forward, taking out the guards one by one. But the deeper they went into the fortress, the more difficult the battle became. The enemy wasn't going to let Zoria reclaim what was rightfully hers without a fight. Zoria's breath came in ragged gasps as she moved through the corridors of the stronghold. She could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the walls, the screams of both her allies and her enemies. The closer they got to the heart of the stronghold, the more intense the fighting became. At last, they reached the inner chamber. The door was guarded, but Zoria didn't hesitate. She swung her blade, cutting down the guards in one swift motion. The door creaked open, revealing the heart of the enemy's stronghold. Inside, the leader of the traitors, a man named Kale, stood, waiting. He was tall, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. His armor was ornate, decorated with symbols of power and domination. But Zoria wasn't intimidated. She had seen too much loss, too much betrayal to be afraid of him. "You're too late," Kale said with a sneer as he stepped forward. "The rebellion is already lost. Your people are dead. You are nothing." Zoria stood tall, her grip tightening on her weapon. "I am not nothing," she said, her voice steady and filled with authority. "I am the last of the Zorathians, and I will not let you destroy everything my people fought for." Kale chuckled darkly, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You're just one woman, Zoria. You think you can defeat me? You think you can defeat an empire?" Zoria stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "I don't need to defeat an empire. I just need to defeat you." With that, she lunged at him, her blade cutting through the air. Kale raised his own weapon, blocking her strike. The clash of their weapons echoed in the chamber, the tension building with each strike. Ethan stood at the ready, watching as Zoria fought with everything she had. This was it, the final showdown. The fate of her people, her legacy, was on the line. He knew she was capable of victory. She just had to believe it. As the battle raged on, Zoria pushed forward, her resolve unshaken. She wouldn't let her people's sacrifice be in vain. This was her moment, her chance to prove to herself and to the galaxy that she was not the broken queen they had left behind. With one final, powerful strike, Zoria defeated Kale, her blade slicing through his armor. He fell to the ground, defeated. And Zoria stood victorious. The room was silent for a moment, the only sound being Zoria's heavy breathing as she took in the sight of her fallen enemy. She had done it. She had taken back what was hers. Ethan walked up to her, his face filled with pride. "You did it." Zoria looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it." And for the first time in a long while, Zoria allowed herself to believe in a future where she could rebuild, a future where she could lead her people once again.